So the one we did yesterday, we showed you guys how to manipulate the JPEG in Photoshop. Today, we're now going to do the same photograph, but we're going to do it using Camera Raw. So I actually have, if you go back into,
let's just get rid of this.
so on that Photoshop drive, and I have the editing workshop, and I have our different sample files. I had that JPEG that I was working from yesterday, but I also have this CR2 in there, and I'll wait and I'll say it again. So let me talk briefly about, we talked a little bit about JPEG versus RAW yesterday, but let me talk just a little bit more here. So obviously we talked about how JPEG is the camera is actually processing the image down and saving it in a different file format. It's actually less information. We can actually compare the files here. So this is the raw file for the file that we were using yesterday, and you can see it is actually, because I'm shooting that 5D SR we've been talking about with the 50 megapixel sensor. It is 83 megabytes. The file is massive. There's tons of information. Not only does it have a large physical size, but the bit depth is higher. It's capturing more information. If we compare that to the JPEG, even though it has that very large physical size, it's 37 megabytes. So it's less than half the size. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. One, it has a lower bit depth. There's less information. And then JPEG also uses this a compression. Raw files are not compressed. They are complete. Every bit of information is written. JPEGs use a compression compression's not bad. Compression is good, but there's different types of compression. Some compression is lossless, like TIFF. There's this type of TIFF compression called LZW that is lossless. So it compresses, it saves space, it comes out the other side, it's larger, all the information is still there. JPEG uses a lossy compression. So in lossless compression, the computer looks at the file and all these millions of pixels and says, okay, this pixel information is actually all the same. So I'm going to write that color information once, and I'm going to store the coordinates, and I don't have to write everything for each pixel. I'm saving space that way. It comes out the other side. All the pixels' coordinates are calculated, and there are the correct colors applied to them. JPEG is a little bit more aggressive. So JPEG uses lossless, which means it's going to pick out all of those pixels that are the same color and write them once. But then JPEG is also going to say, these ones are pretty close. And I'm going to write them as this color too. And the problem is when it comes out the other side, it doesn't go back to the original color. It's now a changed color. And that's what, like, when you'll have to watch for this. That's not, again, this is not the end of the world. This is not horrible. If you over compress, if you open up a JPEG and save it over and over again, it becomes a problem. And then the quality of the image will deteriorate. So you just have to pay attention to that. And then mostly, like, I don't know how many of you guys actually saved that file yesterday. I just closed it. But one of the things when you save a JPEG, and it will ask you what level of compression you want to use. So you actually have options of how aggressively you want to compress it. Always, always, always go with a high quality JPEG that is less compression. Okay, so not necessarily a bad thing. It's fine, but that's, you can see the difference. We also saw kind of like the difference of how we will see the difference. We saw how we were able to edit that image yesterday, and it was kind of tough because it was an overexposed image and it was blown out. And we're going to find today when we bring when we start to work with this raw file, that we actually have a great deal more latitude. So what I want you to do is, I want you to find that raw file. You can use Bridge or Windows File Explorer, whatever you want. And I want you to open that in Photoshop. Now, when you open that in Photoshop, it will actually open up Camera Raw in between. Oh, I also didn't talk about one other thing. Not all raw files are going to be labeled CR2. If you shoot Canon, your raw files will be labeled CR2. If you shoot Sony, it's going to be ARW. If it's Nikon, it's NEF. Every camera company has their own proprietary raw file format. And that's fine, as long as you keep your software up to date. It's not an issue because Adobe is constantly updating so that new cameras information is loaded into Camera Raw. Okay, so go ahead and open that CR2 file in Photoshop. The file says she's messed up, so you actually have to drag it in. Yeah, same file. I want to show them the difference because it's obviously. Okay, so now I want to talk about, this is actually really cool functionality, all right? Basically, what's happening here is we have, so when we were in the levels, we have the highlight slider, we have the shadow slider, we have a midtone slider. So we can reassign the white point, we can reassign the black point, and we can move those interior points. This gives us a great deal more flexibility. We have exposure, which is going to be the most aggressive of it. And as you look at there's two ways to do this. As Nikole puts her cursor over the histogram in the middle, see how it lights up? That is actually, you can manipulate the exposure in two ways. You can click and drag the exposure slider, or you can actually click and drag right there within the histogram. And you can see how the histogram responds to it. Okay, so the exposure is going to mostly focus in the middle portion of the histogram, but it does manipulate the rest of the information. It's, you know, the most aggressive of all of our tools there. So you can, what I want you to do is, we'll start there. By using that exposure, try to clean up the histogram. Remember, you want the histogram to, as much as possible, stretch from one end to the other of that area that we have for it, so that we, you know, we have information all the way across. Now, I'm sure you are already noticing the differences between yesterday and today. Have you noted how much better this looks as you're editing it immediately? This is because the raw file has so much more information available. The JPEG has less information, so as you manipulate that histogram, it doesn't have as much information to work with, and so it's tougher to edit. It's not as, you don't have the small differences that you can take advantage of because there's more data, there's smaller differences in the information. and you have so much more latitude editing in RAW, okay? And we're waiting a second to make sure everybody's comfortable in the same spot, and we'll start talking about some more things.
If you don't like what you've done, you just press cancel.
You can actually, actually, if you don't like what you've done, here's the beauty of this. So this is still actually non-destructive at this point. So you can, this is, if you clicked done, and it would actually just close Camera Raw down, it would not open the file in Photoshop, and the file would just be, and we're all using the same file right now, so don't do that. We're just playing. We're probably going to corrupt this file because we're all in the same file right now. But that's okay. We'll manage. But the beautiful part of it is, you see what's happening here? Just says -63. If you don't like what you've done, just zero that out and try again.
Control Z will do it too.
Yeah, you can use Control Z in here, just like you can in any other program. So you can see immediately just how much more powerful this is, and all we touched was exposure. Now, the beautiful part of it is, so on exposure, that portion, that middle portion of the histogram is highlighted because that's where we're mostly editing.
Oh, I'm like, I did not touch anything.
Nicole's like, it's gonna blow, everybody get out!
I broke it. I'm not faculty. I don't know what's gonna happen.
Okay, now I want to point out how when we look at the highlights, shadows, whites, and black information, it also highlights areas of the histogram as well. It's showing you where that edit is going to focus in on. So we can make fine-tune edits. So you can see here, Nikole put the cursor over the left. That's actually our blacks. So the information furthest to the left is the black information. If she moves to, and she's editing it, you can see her, she's dragging it right now. She's reassigning those black points, and you can see how the histogram is manipulating. And now she's getting nice, rich blacks in the file. She's also manipulating other things as well, but mainly focusing on the blacks, okay? The next one over to the right of that is the shadow slider information. So we have lots of latitude, lots of different ways that we can manipulate that. So if you work in that area, that is going to focus, not necessarily, it's not going to be as aggressive on the blacks and the rest of it, but just in these middle, darker shadow areas. So lots and lots of latitude. Conversely, so black is all the way on the left, white is all the way on the right. So you see that peak that's really bad that hopefully we want to deal with a little bit here, and we don't want to mess everything else up. We could actually manipulate just that area and try to recover some of those blown out highlights without messing up the rest of the histogram. It's going to be tough. We're not going to be able to do it perfectly, but look at how much better as she's done that. We still have some blown out areas that we're not going to get back, but she has brought out so much detail in this rock that appeared like it was so far gone and blown out that this was a completely ruined, unusable image. Still not great. Still, we have better images than this that we would use if we were actually, well, I like using this image. I like using this image for this purpose because it was so overexposed and that was so blown out. But even with as overexposed as this image is, because the image was shot raw, there's a great deal of latitude to correct it a great deal. Look like you're about to say something.
Oh, I'm good.
Okay. Now, another thing about this image, so that's the whites, sorry. You can also do the highlights, as you can see here, that would be just to the left of that rightmost portion. So you can, again, lots of different ways that you can manipulate that histogram really effectively. Another thing about this image that is really tricky is because it was shot in such hot light, the contrast is almost too much. So you might want to actually knock the contrast back. And that's one of the sliders we also have there. So you can, if you have an image that's dull and needs contrast, you can pop it up there. If you have an image that's, shot in really harsh light like this, you need to knock it down a little bit, you can do that a little bit. And actually, in this case, it's like the contrast was so high that you can really aggressively knock that contrast down, and it doesn't, you actually still have a pretty good, you wouldn't want to do that much, obviously, but I mean, that's how hot that light was. This is why we don't shoot in the middle of the day. But yeah, that just happened to be when we were there, though. It was a day actually we were like, oh man, I wish we had more time because I want to shoot this tonight, but we got to go home. This is Mesa Verde National Park in southwest Colorado. Nicole and I were helping one of our kids move to Phoenix, and then on the way back decided we were gonna get a couple of fun things. But we needed to get home, didn't have a lot of time. So you can see, nothing wrong with editing images in Photoshop with some of the tools that are there. They're good tools. They're helpful tools. Nothing wrong with Jpeg, okay? It's a good file format. But I want you to be aware of kind of the power of raw files and being able to edit in Camera Raw. So we're just up here at the top right now. We'll talk about a couple of these other things. We mainly wanted to talk about exposure, but we do want to go through some of these other things. A good point I want to make about this is that once you're comfortable with this visual dialogue and how to edit the photographs in this, and this is one of these things where it's like, for a long time I was fighting Lightroom and I was editing all my photos in Camera Raw. Lightroom is basically this exact same dialogue. Lightroom edits photographs the exact same way. Lightroom is basically
It's Camera
Raw on steroids. It's like, it's Camera Raw, but better. So that's another reason why I like to show this, even as you can edit photographs, quickly in Camera Raw like this. You can actually even manipulate multiple images. You'll note here that we opened this image and it has this one image down here. If I actually had like a half dozen Camera Raw files and I opened them all, and I opened all of them in Photoshop at the same time, they would all show up down here and I could actually batch edit them. So Camera Raw is actually incredibly similar to Lightroom. It just doesn't, it's not quite as easy, quite as fast as Lightroom, okay? So a lot of the functionality is the same. Now you also have great tools for editing your color. If you go to the top of this, you'll see here, like it has the white balance, and we're looking at, so it's as shot, and I don't even remember what I don't know what I did that day. So the temperature, the white balance temperature was set to 5,150 degrees Kelvin, okay? I'll talk very briefly about that. Don't get caught up too much in it. It is something you do need to know about your camera and dig into. Your light has color. Some light is warm, some light is cool. If you're shooting in the shadows, whatever you're shooting is going to appear cool. If you're shooting under these lights, whatever you're shooting is going to appear warm. The color of that light is measured in this temperature Kelvin, okay? You actually have in your camera the ability to set your color temperature, your white balance to different conditions like sunny day, cloudy day, shade, indoor, tungsten, whatever, okay? We can edit that information in Camera Raw. This is actually fairly appropriate, but maybe a touch on the hot side. It's a little bit warm, so you could actually knock that temperature down a little bit, cool it down so it's not so warm. It's not terribly far off, but it is a little on the warm side. And by doing that, look at that. I mean, it really is a lot nicer, a few hundred degrees cooler.
Sometimes it doesn't take much.
Yeah,
If it was at 51.
you don't want to go crazy with it because you'll like really make the color wet. You can make the color crazy in a hurry.
I've shot in South Heights Gym, and it's a pretty like yellowish orange light in there. And depending on like if I'm shooting like up into the lights more versus straight on to the court, and depending on also, you know, the colors of, you know, if the opponent's green jerseys versus blue jerseys, that makes a difference too. But some photos, I went from 5,000 Kelvin all the way down to 3,500. And then some, in that same exact game, I went from 5,000 to 4,800. And it visually looked the same, but it was because I was either shooting down at the floor versus shooting up at the light. So if I was shooting up at the light, I had to make a more drastic change because I was getting more warmth from the light versus if I was shooting down on the floor, it was a little bit more natural.
And we were talking yesterday about environmental color and how that affects things too. Like, so if there's like Central's gym is
Oh, it's
horrendous because there's so much
red.
rich red in there, everything comes out red. So it depends on the environmental colors, and that's why it changes sometimes as well. So it's something that this takes time to get comfortable with, and there are some really cool presets to use. Just like your camera has those presets, you can see here, auto, daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent, and you can just kind of play with it and try it out. And you will, this is actually something like we talked about yesterday, there's really no perfect, and sometimes like you kind of have to learn to judge by eye color a little bit. You do want to do it as scientifically as possible where you can, but you do have to kind of train your eye. And that just comes with time. And, you know, the more photographs you edit, the better you'll be able to judge color by eye, and the quicker you're going to be able to make those, and more confident you'll be able to make those kinds of edits. So just be aware. Tint is a little bit trickier to use, but you know, obviously this is, you know, lots of green, but we could go a little bit more to the magenta side if we wanted. You know, you just kind of play with it. But as you can see here, yeah, if you go too far, it's just like, yeah. So you can, you know, you do have to be careful not to do too much. And this is where, you know, things like white balance tools, like those gray cards, are really handy. In fact, this tool here this is the white balance tool. If I had a gray card or something I was prepared to decide, yes, this is neutral, I can actually just click on that eyedropper, go into the image and click on something, and the software will actually adjust everything based on what I clicked on being a neutral, that R equals G equals B. So, but there's nothing in this image that I would say is actually neutral. You have to actually be able to, you actually have to be able to, yes, this is neutral. In fact, when you're doing that, like if you're doing it for a highlight, you can't use a light source. You can't use a reflection of a light source because of course light has color. So that's why I do carry a gray card, and when color is really important, I'm always shooting with my gray card in the photograph. You know, I'll shoot a series of images. The first image is usually something that helps me identify what it is that I'm actually shooting. So later on, I can like label it appropriately, but then I'll actually throw the gray card in, open all those photographs together, color corrected based on the first photograph with the gray card. So everything is consistent all the way through. Okay. You can also do, there's some really fun stuff down here. Once we get through that kind of color, we also have texture, clarity, and dehaze. I mostly use texture at this point. Texture pops up your contrast, but is not as aggressive as clarity. You do have to be careful not to do too much because it just makes your image like too grainy. Like with this, I think you could actually get away with it because that's very organic, lots of awesome texture. But you do have to be careful. In fact, I love the way it made that look. Whoo, that's cool. That's really nice. But you do have to be careful, because it's one of the problems with, adding too much contrast with, texture and clarity is that your images start to get like grainy, gritty. And also this is where, and like, I really enjoy the artistry of photography, but even I will look at photographs and go, ooh, that's over edited. So somebody went way too far on that one. So that's actually something where images will appear way over edited, is that like the contrast is just ramped up way too high, particularly with things like texture and clarity. Dehaze I don't use too much, but it can be useful. It is another contrast tool. But like I said, I like, for the most part, I do like a little bit of fairly light texture work for the most part, because it is the least aggressive and protects more information in the image. So you're less likely to get nasty grain in your edits by using texture first.
The dehaze is, at least from what I've seen, if you're shooting out on a landscape and it's like early morning, or your lens has a little bit of a, I don't know, not necessarily that your lens is dirty, but because of how the light is hitting your lens, it'll add kind of almost a cloudy, foggy effect when there's no cloud or fog, mist, whatever you want to call it, in the landscape. Dehaze will help take that away.
It's not magic, but yeah, it does help. And you do have to be careful against not to go too aggressive.
Yeah, because it will also act as a saturation, color saturation, and the contrast tool as well. So you do have to be careful with it, but it will help if it's like, you look at your photo and you're like, I don't remember there being any fog. Why does this look so like hazy, or like there's smoke in the area? That'll help with that a little bit.
So a lot of the tools that we have available to us, it's like we have two options or three options in some cases. And the options are less aggressive, more aggressive. So texture, less aggressive, clarity, more aggressive. The same thing with vibrance and saturation. So with vibrance and saturation, like oftentimes we shoot a photograph and we get home and it doesn't look like we remember in our mind's eye. Typically, a good example is like an incredibly vibrant, beautiful sunset or a rainbow. And there's a reason for this, okay? The reason for this is because of visible color. I can't minimize this. That's okay. I'll live. So no, that's all right. I was going to draw, but I don't need to. So essentially, there is, wavelengths and colors of light, I'm sure you guys understand color theory to, at least at a basic level. There's all kinds of wavelengths of light, including many, many, many wavelengths of light that we cannot see with our eye, okay? Then we have the visible spectrum of light that we can actually see and perceive with our eyes. Then there is the color space that our camera can actually capture. So that's why, that's one of the reasons why when we take that beautiful photograph and we're like, oh my gosh, so this is just amazing, this moment, this beautiful light at this moment in time, and you're taking photographs, and then you get home and you look at the photographs on your computer and you're like, that is not what I saw. What is going on here? We have tools that we can use to try to not correct that, but to pop the colors up, to bring it back a little closer to what we remember in our mind's eye. And that's like the vibrance and saturation. Saturation, more aggressive, but weird stuff happens when you're too aggressive with saturation. Vibrance is less aggressive and protects certain color issues. It basically will not allow certain colors to pop quite as hot as what does with saturation. So vibrance is our less aggressive option, protects certain areas of color from going too far, and then saturation is the super aggressive option for us. Okay, so we can, if we want to put more color in an image, we can use vibrance and saturation. Vibrance is our conservative tool. We can also knock it back. If it's like some of the colors are just too hot, it's just too much. We can knock it back. And this is a way you can make it black and white, but there's more appropriate ways to make it black and white. Okay. All right. Now there's a whole lot more there, but that's where I want to stop today. And I think that was a lot. You guys are probably like, oh my gosh, but wait, there's more? There's a whole lot more. That's, the fairly basic color correction, tonal correction of camera raw, okay? All right, so you don't have to save that. You can just click cancel or whatever. So what I want to do next, so we've gotten through some basics, some foundational ideas as to how we manipulate exposure and color and contrast in images. And you're going to have to practice and play and give it time.